12-year-old Jamal Taylor lies face down on hot concrete, screaming in agony as pepper spray burns his eyes. Officer Stephen Wilson stands over him, badge glinting in the summer Sunday. 3 blocks away, Deputy Director Anthony Taylor's phone buzzes with a text from a neighbor, "They got your son." Within the hour, the police department will wish they'd never touched the boy. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice and a father's fight for accountability, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe every child deserves protection regardless of their skin color. Subscribe to join our community fighting for justice, and stay tuned to discover how a single moment of racial profiling unleashed a storm that would shake an entire police department to its core. Jamal Taylor was having the kind of summer day most 12-year-olds dream about. With only 3 weeks left before school resumed, the gifted middle schooler had spent his morning at the community library gathering research materials for an advanced science project on renewable energy. The librarian, Mrs. Gonzalez, had even pulled special resources from the high school section, impressed by his enthusiasm and knowledge. "You're going places, Jamal," she had told him with a warm smile as she helped him check out the stack of books. The compliment still lingered in his mind as he decided to take a shortcut home through Pinecrest, an affluent neighborhood with sprawling properties and manicured lawns. Despite living just beyond its unofficial borders in a modest but comfortable home, Jamal rarely walked through Pinecrest. His parents had never explicitly forbidden it, but their carefully worded advice about areas where people might make assumptions had been clear enough. Today, however, the July heat had climbed past 95 degrees, and the shortcut would save him nearly 15 minutes of walking under the blistering Sunday. He'd made the calculation any logical person would 15 minutes less exposure to dangerous heat versus the unlikely chance of someone questioning his presence. Logic, however, didn't account for Officer Stephen Wilson. Wilson had been with the department for 11 years, transferred from a smaller jurisdiction under circumstances that were never fully disclosed to the public. At 38, he had accumulated 17 civilian complaints about excessive force and discriminatory behavior, yet his personnel file remained unblemished through the magic of internal reviews that consistently found insufficient evidence or justified action. Today, Wilson was patrolling Pinecrest, following reports of minor vandalism to mailboxes, teenage mischief that had nevertheless sparked outrage among the wealthy residents. When Wilson spotted Jamal walking with his backpack full of books, something in the officer's demeanor shifted. He slowed his patrol car, watching the boy through mirrored sunglasses. Jamal felt the car before he saw it, the crawling presence of a vehicle moving too slowly behind him. His shoulders tensed, his father's voice echoing in his mind. "If stopped, be respectful but clear about your rights. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements." The patrol car pulled alongside him, and Officer Wilson rolled down his window. "What are you doing in this neighborhood, boy?" The question carried no pretense of professional courtesy. Jamal stopped walking, turned partially toward the officer, while maintaining a respectful distance, hands clearly visible, with books pressed against his chest. "I'm just walking home from the library, sir." His voice came out steadier than he felt. Wilson stepped out of his vehicle without turning off the engine. "We've had reports of suspicious activity. Let me see some ID." Jamal's heart raced, but he remembered his father's lessons. "I'm 12 years old, sir. I don't have an ID. I live just past Oak Ridge Street. I'm just taking a shortcut because of the heat." Wilson moved closer, hand resting casually on his holster. "What's in the backpack? Empty it out on the ground." Fear bloomed in Jamal's chest. "It's just library books, sir, for my science project." When he didn't immediately comply, Wilson stepped closer. "When an officer gives you an order, you follow it. Now empty the backpack." Jamal, frightened, but remembering his rights, reached slowly for his phone in his pocket. "I'd like to call my father. He works for the government." Wilson's reaction was immediate and violent. "He's reaching." In one fluid motion, the officer grabbed Jamal's arm, twisting it behind his back and slamming the boy face first onto the sidewalk. The library books scattered across the concrete. Jamal's phone clattered away, screen shattering. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." Jamal cried out, the sight of his face, pressed against hot pavement. "Stop resisting, Wilson," shouted, though the boy was merely trying to protect his face from the rough concrete. When Jamal attempted to explain again, Wilson unholstered his pepper spray and discharged it directly into the boy's face from inches away. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. Jamal's scream cut through the quiet neighborhood as the chemical agent burned his eyes, nose, and mouth. Unable to see and in excruciating pain, his body naturally writhed in agony, movements Wilson interpreted as continued resistance. The officer roughly handcuffed the 12-year-old's hands behind his back, the metal cutting into his wrists. From her front porch, Eleanor Thompson, a retired schoolteacher, witnessed the entire encounter. She grabbed her phone and began recording while shouting at the officer, "What are you doing? He's just a child." Wilson pointed at her without releasing pressure on Jamal. "Ma'am, stay back. This is police business." Two other neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. One began filming as well, while another recognized the boy. "That's Anthony Taylor's son, James Peterson," called out, approaching cautiously. "He lives 3 blocks over. His father works for the FBI." Wilson's posture changed subtly, but he maintained his authoritative stance. The suspect was behaving suspiciously and reached for a possible weapon. Jamal, still blinded and in agony, managed to gasp out between sobs, "I was just trying to call my dad. I wasn't doing anything wrong." Wilson radioed for backup, reporting a combative juvenile suspect and ignoring the gathering. Neighbors' objections. Peterson moved closer, his voice dropping to a warning. "Officer, do you have any idea who his father is? Anthony Taylor is a deputy director with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. You've made a terrible mistake." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Wilson's face, but training and pride prevented him from acknowledging the error. Instead, he doubled down. The suspect's family connections don't excuse suspicious behavior or resisting an officer. As additional patrol cars approached in the distance, Eleanor Thompson had already sent the video to both her neighborhood group chat and, crucially, to Anthony Taylor himself with a text that would set everything in motion. "They got your son." Deputy Director Anthony Taylor was in the middle of a high-level briefing about domestic terrorism threats when his phone vibrated in his pocket. Normally, he would never check messages during such meetings, but something, parental instinct perhaps, made him glance discreetly at the screen. The message preview from his neighbor Eleanor made his blood run cold. "They got your son." Attached was a video file still loading. Without explanation, Anthony abruptly excused himself, earning surprised looks from the FBI director and Homeland Security officials gathered around the table. In the hallway of the federal building, he played the video with trembling fingers. The sight of his son face down on concrete, screaming in pain while a police officer knelt on his back, shattered something fundamental in Anthony's world. For 23 years, he had served in law enforcement, the last 7 in the FBI's Civil Rights Division, investigating police misconduct cases across the country. He had reviewed hundreds of similar videos, testified before Congress about systemic racism in policing, and helped develop federal guidelines for reform. But nothing had prepared him for seeing his own child become another statistic, another victim, another black body under a white officer's knee. His first call was to his wife, Vanessa Taylor, a prominent civil rights attorney who had argued before the Supreme Court twice. Jamal was all he could manage when she answered. "Wilson, Pinecrest. I'm heading there now." Vanessa's sharp intake of breath was followed by her lawyer's precision. "I'm calling Judge Matthews for an emergency release order. Don't let them take him to juvenile detention. I'm on my way." As Anthony rushed to his car, memories flooded his mind. Teaching Jamal to ride a bike, coaching his debate team, their countless conversations about navigating life as a black male in America. They had tried so hard to prepare their son, while allowing him a childhood unburdened by fear. Anthony had carefully explained the realities without crushing Jamal's spirit. "Keep your hands visible. Speak respectfully, but know your rights. If stopped, call us immediately." The cruel irony that Jamal had been assaulted for trying to follow these exact instructions wasn't lost on him. The 15-minute drive to Pinecrest was the longest of Anthony's life. He parked haphazardly and ran the final block FBI credentials clutched in his hand. The scene that greeted him was chaotic. 3 police cruisers with flashing lights, a small crowd of neighbors, and at the center, his son sitting on the curb handcuffed and whimpering in pain, his face swollen and red from pepper spray. Officer Wilson stood nearby, speaking with another officer, his posture defensive. Anthony identified himself to the perimeter officer, who immediately recognized the federal credentials and stepped aside with obvious concern. As Anthony approached his son, Wilson intercepted him, unaware of who he was addressing. "Sir, you need to stay back. This is an active scene." Anthony's voice carried the weight of both parental fury and professional authority. "I'm Deputy Director Anthony Taylor of the FBI, and that is my 12-year-old son who has been assaulted. Remove those handcuffs immediately." Wilson's expression shifted from authoritative to uncertain, but his training in controlling situations took over. "Sir, regardless of who you are, I can't have you interfering with." Anthony cut him off, voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Officer Wilson, you have exactly 10 seconds to remove those restraints from my son, or I will personally ensure that your career ends today." The standoff might have escalated further had Captain Daniel Phillips not arrived at that moment. Unlike Wilson, Phillips immediately recognized Anthony from Joint Task Force operations and media appearances. His face paled as he assessed the situation. A high-ranking FBI official's son handcuffed and injured, multiple witnesses recording, and an officer with a history of complaints at the center of it all. Deputy Director Taylor Phillips said, hurrying forward with forced cordiality, "There's clearly been a misunderstanding. Let's get those cuffs off the boy right away." As another officer finally removed Jamal's handcuffs, Anthony rushed to his son, carefully examining his injuries while whispering reassurances. Jamal collapsed against his father, sobbing with relief and lingering fear. "I was just trying to call you Dad. I didn't do anything wrong." Anthony cradled his son's face, using a clean handkerchief to gently wipe away tears and pepper spray residue. "I know, son. I know. We're going to get you medical attention, and then we're going to address this." He turned to Captain Phillips, who was already in damage control mode. "We'll need witness statements, all body camera footage, the dispatch records, and Officer Wilson's unredacted personnel file by tomorrow morning." Phillips's smile tightened. "Deputy Director, I understand you're upset, but there are protocols." Anthony's interruption was razor sharp. "Captain, I've spent 7 years investigating departments that hide behind protocols to shield misconduct. Don't make your department my next case." As an ambulance arrived to transport Jamal to the hospital, Anthony made a promise both to his son and to himself. "This won't be another case that disappears into the system, Jamal. What happened to you today will not happen without consequences." In the background, Wilson conferred quietly with his union representative, who had arrived on scene, while Captain Phillips made urgent phone calls to the department's legal counsel. Anthony overheard Phillips saying, "Yes, that Taylor. Civil Rights Division. No, I don't think this can be handled quietly." At the hospital, as doctors treated Jamal for chemical burns to his eyes and face, Anthony received another call from Captain Phillips, his tone now conciliatory. "Deputy Director, I want to personally express how deeply regrettable this incident island. The department would like to extend every courtesy to you and your family during this difficult time." The message was clear. They were offering special treatment, hoping Anthony's status would make him accept a privileged resolution unavailable to most families in similar situations. Anthony's response was equally clear. "Captain, my son received no courtesy or consideration from your officer. He was profiled, assaulted, and traumatized for walking while black in an affluent neighborhood. I don't want special treatment. I want accountability. The same accountability every child deserves, regardless of who their parents are." As Vanessa arrived at the hospital, her legal mind already formulating strategies, while her mother's heart broke at the sight of her injured child. Anthony knew they were entering a battle that would test not only their professional expertise, but their family's resilience. The system that they had both worked within and fought against was now directly threatening their most precious treasure, their son. The rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer professional. It was deeply, irrevocably personal. While Jamal spent the night in the hospital under observation for chemical burns to his corneas, Officer Stephen Wilson was already building his defense with Police Union Representative Michael Donovan in a windowless room at Union headquarters. Remember, the encounter began because the subject matched a description of suspects vandalizing property in Pinecrest. Donovan advised sliding a notepad toward Wilson. Write down exactly what threatening movements he made that necessitated restraint. Wilson looked uncertain. There wasn't actually a specific description beyond teenage suspects. And he didn't really make threatening movements, just reached for his phone. Donovan sighed heavily, pushing the notepad closer. Stephen, let me be clear. A federal heavyweight is involved now. If you don't establish solid justification, you'll be sacrificed to appease him. The department won't back you without a defensible narrative. Across town, Captain Phillips was dealing with another problem, the officer's body camera footage. What do you mean corrupted? He demanded of the technology officer. The critical 2 minutes when contact was initiated are missing. Timestamp 22 minutes into his shift until 24 minutes. Everything else is intact. The tech officer avoided eye contact. System errors happen, Captain, especially in high-temperature conditions. Phillips didn't believe it for a second, but the convenient corruption served immediate department interests, even as it raised ethical questions he quickly suppressed. Preserve everything else. Document the system error thoroughly. The following morning, Captain Phillips arrived at the hospital with a gift basket of premium fruit and gourmet chocolates, his face arranged in a mask of professional concern. He found Anthony Taylor in the hallway outside Jamal's room reviewing case files that his assistant had delivered from the FBI office. Deputy Director Taylor, I wanted to personally check on your son's condition and bring a small token from the department. Anthony regarded the basket without touching it. My son has chemical burns on his face and may have temporary vision impairment. Your token doesn't address that reality. Phillips lowered his voice conspiratorially. I understand your frustration, but I hope we can handle this situation discreetly. Officer Wilson has an otherwise excellent record, and these unfortunate incidents can damage important relationships between our agencies. The implication was clear. Take the special treatment, drop the matter, maintain professional courtesies. Anthony's response was equally clear. Captain, if your son was assaulted for walking home from a library, would you consider it an unfortunate incident to be handled discreetly? Before Phillips could respond, Anthony continued, his voice gaining intensity. And let's be absolutely clear about something. Children make mistakes. Trained officers with deadly weapons and state authority do not get to make mistakes that traumatize innocent 12-year-olds. Phillips shifted tactics. The officer reports your son was acting suspiciously and reached suddenly toward his waistband. Anthony cut him off, eyes flashing. My son was reaching for his phone to call me exactly as I've instructed him to do if ever approached by police. That action, a black child exercising his right to call a parent, was interpreted as threatening by your officer because of racial bias, conscious or unconscious. Phillips departed shortly after his gift basket rejected and his damage control efforts unsuccessful. Inside Jamal's hospital room, the Taylor family experienced firsthand how privilege operated even in medical settings. The attending physician had initially treated Jamal with clinical detachment, asking pointed questions about what he had done to provoke the incident, until learning his father's position. Suddenly, specialists were consulted. The hospital administrator visited personally, and the quality of care visibly improved. This transformation wasn't lost on Vanessa, who whispered to Anthony, "This is exactly why we have to fight this. Imagine the treatment he'd receive if we were just ordinary parents." Meanwhile, the incident was gaining traction online. Eleanor Thompson's video had gone viral overnight, showing Jamal's terrified face pressed against concrete while Officer Wilson knelt on his back. The department's public affairs office issued a statement that morning. The Westbrook Police Department is investigating an incident involving a juvenile subject in Pinecrest neighborhood. The subject was temporarily detained while officers responded to reports of vandalism. The juvenile was subsequently released to parental custody. Officer safety protocols were followed during the brief encounter. The carefully crafted statement made no mention of pepper spray, the boy's age, or the fact that he had required hospital treatment. It implied Jamal had been legitimately detained as a vandalism suspect, rather than arbitrarily stopped while walking home. The department's press officer, Sandra Miller, didn't stop there. She began quietly researching Anthony Taylor's background, looking for any controversy or misstep in his distinguished career. She reached out to contacts in conservative media outlets known to be sympathetic to police and hostile to federal oversight. "I'm not saying we have anything specific yet," she told one producer, "but we should be prepared if this escalates." The father is highly placed in the FBI's Civil Rights Division, which, as you know, has been targeting local police departments for years. As the video continued spreading, public reaction split predictably along familiar lines. Some viewers saw a clear case of racial profiling and excessive force against a child. Others questioned why Jamal was in that neighborhood and suggested he must have done something to provoke the response. The comment sections became battlegrounds for America's unresolved racial tensions, with Jamal's injured face, the latest unwilling symbol. Have you ever wondered why some police misconduct cases gain national attention while others fade into obscurity? Is it the severity of the incident, the victim's identity, or something else entirely? In this case, would Officer Wilson be facing the same scrutiny if Jamal's father wasn't an FBI official? Comment number 1. If you believe every police misconduct case deserves equal investigation, regardless of the victim's family connections. Hit the like button if you think body cameras should be required to function during every police interaction without convenient malfunctions. Subscribe to follow this story and others like it, where we expose injustice and track the fight for accountability. What would you do if you were in Anthony Taylor's position? How far would you go to protect your child and seek justice? Let's explore what happens when the system designed to shield police from consequences confronts a father with consequences. The knowledge and power to challenge it. Anthony Taylor sat in his home office early the next morning, the formal letter requesting emergency administrative leave on his desk. He had never taken such leave in 23 years of government service, but circumstances had rendered his legendary focus on work impossible. His son's swollen face and frightened eyes had become a constant image in his mind, displacing all other priorities. The call from FBI Director James Harrington came just as Anthony finished signing the leave request. "Anthony, I've just been briefed on the incident involving Jamal. Completely unacceptable situation. You have my full personal support." Harrington began, his tone measured and political as always. "Thank you, Director. I'll be taking leave to focus on Jamal's recovery and addressing this incident properly." Anthony kept his voice neutral, aware of the careful dance that would follow. Harrington cleared his throat. "Of course, completely understandable. However, I feel obligated to mention that your promotion review for the assistant director position is scheduled next month. The committee will be evaluating your judgment and how you manage sensitive situations." The implied warning was subtle but clear. Anthony's response was equally measured. "Are you suggesting that seeking justice for my assaulted child demonstrates poor judgment?" Director A. Lengthy pause followed. "No one is suggesting that, Anthony. I'm merely advising caution about making this personal rather than professional. There are established channels for these matters." After ending the call, Anthony stared at the family photo on his desk. Vanessa Jamal and himself at Jamal's debate championship last year, all smiles and optimism. That Jamal, confident, eloquent eyes bright with possibility, seemed distant from the traumatized boy now sleeping fitfully in his bedroom, waking from nightmares about being unable to breathe. In the kitchen, Vanessa was already deep into legal research, surrounding herself with case precedents and department policies. Her law firm had given her unlimited leave to handle the situation, though several partners had expressed concerns about potential conflicts with police-affiliated clients. "I found something," she said, as Anthony joined her. "Wilson has a pattern of similar incidents with minority youth." She pushed a stack of heavily redacted reports toward him. 7 complaints in the last 3 years alone, all involving Black or Hispanic minors, all dismissed after internal review. The records are sealed, but a contact at the public defender's office shared what they could. Anthony examined the documents, his investigator's mind noting patterns. Same justifications each time. Furtive movements, matched description, reach toward waistband. Classic pretext language. Vanessa nodded grimly. I've connected with Darius Johnson from Community Justice Alliance. He's been documenting police misconduct in this district for years. The pattern goes beyond Wilson. It's departmental. As they strategized, Jamal remained isolated in his room, declining breakfast and friends' visits. The psychological impact was becoming as concerning as his physical injuries. When Anthony checked on him, he found his son researching his own trauma, reading articles about pepper spray effects and police encounters with minors. "Dad, will my eyes be permanently damaged?" Jamal asked, his voice small. The ophthalmologist had been cautiously optimistic, but the question revealed his ongoing fear. "No, son, the burns are superficial. Your vision will fully recover." Anthony sat beside him on the bed. "But I know other things don't heal as quickly." Jamal looked down at his hands. "I keep thinking about what I did wrong. If I hadn't taken that shortcut." Anthony felt a surge of protective rage. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Walking home from a library is not a crime. Being Black in an affluent neighborhood is not suspicious behavior." When Jamal returned to school the following week, the repercussions continued. Some teachers treated him with excessive gentleness, as though he might shatter. Others seemed subtly disapproving, suggesting through their manner that he must have contributed to the situation. Among his peers, Jamal found himself unwillingly famous, the subject of whispers and stares. Some friends grew awkwardly distant, while others expressed solidarity but couldn't truly understand his experience. His debate team captain position, once a source of pride, now felt overwhelming as public speaking triggered anxiety he'd never experienced before. Meanwhile, Officer Wilson had returned to duty, assigned to administrative tasks pending investigation. The police department's internal messaging portrayed him as a victim of political correctness and federal overreach. Fellow officers stopped by his desk, with supportive comments and invitations for drinks after shift. "Don't worry, these things blow over," a veteran sergeant assured him. "Remember the Rodriguez kid last year? All that outcry, and now nobody even remembers it." The department's Internal Affairs Division launched its mandatory investigation, with Lieutenant Frank Mercer leading the process. Mercer's first interview with Jamal focused heavily on the boy's actions, why he was in Pinecrest, whether he had been involved in any vandalism, why he had resisted Officer Wilson's commands. Vanessa, present as both mother and attorney, repeatedly objected to the questioning. "My 12-year-old son was walking home from a library. He was assaulted with a chemical weapon typically reserved for adult aggressors. Your framing suggests he bears responsibility for his own assault." Mercer's response was coolly procedural. "Mrs. Taylor, we're simply establishing the complete factual sequence. Officer Wilson reports that your son made sudden movements consistent with reaching for a weapon." Vanessa's legal training barely contained her maternal fury. "My son was reaching for his phone to call his father, as he had every legal right to do. The assumption that a Black child's hand movement constitutes a threat is precisely the racial bias we're addressing." The investigation proceeded with obvious bias, with more resources dedicated to examining Jamal's background, his school records, social media, and friendships, than Officer Wilson's history of similar incidents. While this was happening, Sandra Miller continued her parallel campaign to shape public narrative. Through selective information leaks to sympathetic media outlets, she suggested Jamal had been associated with a youth group known for troublemaking, and implied Anthony was using his federal position to bully local police. These insinuations found fertile ground in certain media ecosystems, where the narrative of reverse racism and federal overreach resonated with audiences already suspicious of civil rights enforcement. The Taylor family began receiving threatening messages from police supporters, ranging from social media harassment to anonymous calls. "Not everyone in a uniform is your enemy." One message read, "But keep pushing, and we all might become one." The implied threat hung over their home, adding another layer of stress to Jamal's recovery process. At night, Anthony would sometimes find his son checking that doors and windows were locked, a new anxiety that broke his heart. What had been taken from Jamal wasn't just his sense of physical safety, but his fundamental belief in a world where following the rules provided protection. As a father, Anthony couldn't restore that innocent faith. As a federal official dedicated to civil rights enforcement, he could only fight the system that had shattered it. The machinery of that system, designed to protect itself above all, was already in full motion against them. Anthony Taylor had spent his career understanding how institutions protect themselves. Now he was using that knowledge as a weapon. Early Wednesday morning, he submitted formal requests to every business and home within 3 blocks of the incident for their security camera footage. While police had collected selected videos, Anthony suspected they had overlooked perspectives that might contradict Officer Wilson's account. His FBI credentials opened doors that would remain closed to ordinary citizens seeking the same information. By noon, he had obtained comprehensive footage from 7 additional cameras, creating a timeline that the police department couldn't control. The most damning video came from the Richardson's doorbell camera, showing Jamal walking calmly with his library books, seconds before Officer Wilson initiated contact. The footage clearly captured Wilson's aggressive approach and contradicted claims that Jamal had been behaving suspiciously. Anthony carefully secured the original files and prepared verified copies, knowing from experience how easily digital evidence could be questioned or corrupted. That afternoon, his secure phone rang with Director Harrington's private number. "Anthony, we need to talk. In person. My office, 5 o'clock. The tone allowed no discussion. When Anthony arrived at FBI headquarters, he was escorted not to Harrington's official office, but to a secure conference room used for sensitive operations. Harrington was already seated, along with Deputy General Counsel Margaret Chen. No pleasantries were exchanged. "Anthony, I've received calls from the mayor, the police commissioner, and 2 senators on the Intelligence Committee expressing concerns about your handling of this matter." Harrington's expression remained carefully neutral. "They suggest you're using federal resources for a personal vendetta." Anthony had anticipated this move. "Director, I've used no federal resources beyond my personal credentials to obtain evidence that should have been collected in any proper investigation. My actions have been completely within ethical guidelines." Chen interjected smoothly. "The perception remains problematic. Deputy Director Taylor, your position in civil rights enforcement creates an appearance of conflict." Anthony turned to her. "Would this conversation be happening if my son were white, or if I worked in counterterrorism instead of civil rights?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the complex racial dynamics within the Bureau itself. Throughout his career, Anthony had navigated these waters carefully, being assertive without appearing angry, demanding excellence, without seeming difficult, mentoring minority agents, while avoiding accusations of favoritism. He had built his reputation on impeccable professionalism while quietly enduring microaggressions and double standards. Now, with his son's welfare at stake, the political capital he had accumulated was being tested. Harrington sighed, removing his glasses. "Anthony, off the record. I understand your position as a father, but this situation has escalated beyond a local police matter. There are concerns about jurisdictional overreach, interagency relations, and political optics at play." The subtext was clear. Powerful interests were uncomfortable with a high-ranking black FBI official publicly challenging police misconduct. It threatened the careful balance of power and the unspoken agreements between law enforcement agencies. Anthony leaned forward. "Director, with respect, if the Bureau asks me to choose between justice for my son and my career advancement, that's not a difficult decision." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But consider this. What message does it send if the FBI's Civil Rights Division can't protect the civil rights of its own leadership's families? What credibility would we have left?" Meanwhile, Vanessa's investigation was uncovering disturbing patterns within the Westbrook Police Department. Captain Phillips' name appeared repeatedly in connection with excessive force complaints that were systematically buried. Working with community activist Darius Johnson, She discovered that Phillips had personally intervened in 23 cases involving minority civilians in affluent neighborhoods over the past 5 years. None had resulted in disciplinary action against officers. More concerning was a pattern of similar incidents, specifically in Pinecrest, suggesting an unofficial policy rather than isolated misconduct. At home, Jamal was slowly processing his trauma through unexpected channels. Initially withdrawn and anxious, he began researching other cases of police violence against minors, connecting with online support groups for families affected by similar incidents. "Dad, did you know there were over 2,000 documented cases of police using pepper spray on minors last year?" he asked one evening, his laptop open to a research paper. Most were Black or Hispanic, and almost 90% resulted in no disciplinary action against officers. Anthony was struck by his son's resilience and emerging advocacy, even as he worried about the weight of this knowledge on young shoulders. "I know, son. It's why my division exists. But statistics don't capture the human impact." Jamal looked up, his eyes more serious than any 12-year-old should be. "That's why people need to hear our story right. Because I'm not just a statistic." The Taylor family's decision to pursue accountability was not without consequences. Death threats began arriving at their home, forcing them to temporarily relocate to a secure location. Anthony's colleagues at the FBI subtly distanced themselves, fearful of being associated with what some were characterizing as an anti-police crusade. Vanessa's law firm received calls from corporate clients expressing concerns about her involvement in a high-profile police misconduct case. Even family friends grew awkwardly cautious in conversations, unsure which side of the increasingly politicized situation they should take. Officer Wilson, meanwhile, was navigating his own complex position. Initially supported unconditionally by fellow officers and the union, he was approached by Thomas Reeves, a right-wing media personality with a popular Blue Lives Matter podcast. "We can make you the face of police under siege," Reeves offered during a private meeting arranged by Sandra Miller. "The federal government trying to destroy a dedicated officer for doing his job. Our audience will rally behind you." Wilson felt simultaneously flattered and uncomfortable, aware he was becoming a pawn in a larger political game. Though he believed his actions had been justified, the growing evidence contradicting his report created private doubts he shared with no one. Behind the scenes, the machinery of institutional protection was operating at full capacity. The police union hired Richard Coleman, a prominent attorney, specializing in defending officers accused of misconduct. Coleman's reputation was built on aggressive tactics, including investigating victims' backgrounds for any information that could diminish their credibility. Simultaneously, political pressure was applied to District Attorney Eleanor Vance, who received calls from several city council members and state legislators expressing concerns about rushing to judgment in the case. The message was clear: charging Officer Wilson would have political consequences. Captain Phillips arranged a private meeting with Wilson at a bar 20 miles outside town, careful to drive his personal vehicle and leave his phone in the car to avoid creating digital evidence of their conversation. "The department will protect you," he assured Wilson, "but you need to stick precisely to your statement. No deviations, no doubts, no new details." What Phillips didn't share was that departmental support was conditional. At the first sign that higher authorities demanded a sacrifice, Wilson would find himself alone. The captain's primary concern was preventing scrutiny from expanding beyond this single incident to the broader patterns of enforcement he had personally directed. As these power dynamics played out across institutions, the Taylor family remained focused on their dual goals: healing Jamal and securing accountability. They knew from professional experience that the system was designed to exhaust complainants, to make the pursuit of justice so costly in emotional, financial, and social terms that most eventually abandoned their efforts. They were determined not to be worn down regardless of the pressures aligned against them. What they didn't yet realize was that an unexpected ally was developing doubts that would soon crack the blue wall of silence. After 3 weeks of defensive responses and institutional stonewalling, Anthony and Vanessa Taylor decided to fundamentally change their strategy. "We've been playing their game on their terms," Vanessa observed during a late-night strategy session at their temporary apartment. "It's time we created our own battlefield." Their counterattack would operate on multiple fronts, simultaneously leveraging both their professional expertise and the community connections they had sometimes neglected during their high-powered careers. First, while continuing to pursue legal action against Officer Wilson and the department, they partnered with Darius Johnson to organize community hearings where other victims of police misconduct could share their experiences. The first event, held at New Hope Baptist Church, drew over 300 attendees and revealed a disturbing pattern. "I was stopped 3 times in 1 month. Just walking my dog through Pinecrest," testified Michael Robinson, a black architect who had recently moved to an upscale condominium in the area. Each time, officers claimed there had been break-ins reported, but neighbors confirmed no such reports existed. 17 other residents shared similar experiences, describing a pattern of harassment presented as preventative policing. What emerged was evidence of an unofficial but systematic effort to discourage black presence in certain neighborhoods. Cameras from local news stations captured these testimonies, creating public narratives that countered the department's controlled messaging. Second, Vanessa filed a comprehensive class action lawsuit against the Westbrook Police Department on behalf of Jamal and 23 other minority residents who had experienced similar treatment. The legal strategy focused not on individual officer misconduct, but on departmental policies and culture that encouraged discriminatory enforcement. This approach undermined the department's one bad apple defense and exposed the structural nature of the problem. Third, Anthony used his position and authority to request access to sealed records about Officer Wilson's training, psychological evaluations, and transfer from his previous department. This created immediate jurisdictional conflicts, with local officials accusing him of abusing federal power for personal vengeance. However, it also triggered mandatory preservation of records that might otherwise have been lost during the investigation. The counteroffensive came with significant personal costs. Several of Anthony's FBI colleagues openly avoided him in headquarters hallways, concerned that association might damage their own career prospects. An internal email from a senior agent was leaked, referring to Anthony as putting personal grievance above bureau interests, a particularly painful betrayal from someone he had mentored. At Jamal's school, the principal suggested that perhaps a break might be beneficial for everyone after tensions emerged between students whose parents supported different sides of the increasingly public controversy. Most painful was the reaction from Anthony's brother Marcus, a conservative businessman who called to express concern about the family making everything about race and damaging relations with law enforcement. These strains might have broken a less determined family, but instead forged them closer together. Jamal, initially withdrawn and traumatized, found new purpose as he observed his parents' principled stand. Inspired by the community testimonies and his own research into similar cases, he formed a student discussion group focused on youth rights during police encounters. With the school administration reluctant to officially sanction such a potentially divisive topic, the group met in homes and community centers, gradually expanding to include students from neighboring schools. "It's not just about what happened to me," Jamal explained during one session. "It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." While the Taylors built their counter-narrative in public, Officer Wilson was experiencing increasing isolation behind the blue wall. What had begun as unconditional support from fellow officers had subtly shifted as more evidence contradicted his initial report. While no one openly questioned him, invitations for after-shift drinks became less frequent. Captain Phillips, once reassuringly confident, now seemed anxious during their interactions. During a tense meeting in Phillips' office with the blinds drawn, the captain's priorities became clear. "The department will continue supporting you," Phillips assured him, eyes constantly checking his phone for updates. "But we need to discuss containment strategies if this escalates further." Wilson, increasingly unsettled, asked directly, "What exactly are we containing? Captain, my report, or something bigger?" Phillips' response was tellingly evasive. "Let's focus on the immediate situation. The rest isn't your concern." What Wilson didn't yet know was that Captain Phillips had been running an unofficial neighborhood preservation initiative for years, directing officers to conduct additional stops and identity checks of minorities in affluent areas, like Pinecrest. These directives were never written down, but conveyed through trusted sergeants as quality-of-life enforcement or proactive community policing. The program had quiet support from certain homeowners associations concerned about property values and neighborhood character. If this systematic discrimination were exposed, the consequences would extend far beyond Wilson's individual actions to implicate department leadership and potentially city officials who had tacitly approved the approach. As Wilson left the meeting, he encountered Officer Rebecca Chen, a recent transfer, who had been unusually quiet during discussions of the Taylor case. Chen hesitated, then spoke in a near whisper. "Wilson, be careful. You're the only one who'll take the fall if this goes bad." Before he could ask what she meant, she continued her way down the hallway, leaving him with a growing sense of being expendable. The turning point came unexpectedly through Anthony's FBI connections. A background check into Wilson's employment history revealed he had been terminated from the Lakeside Police Department 3 years before joining Westbrook. The official record showed a voluntary transfer, but a confidential source provided Anthony with documentation of Wilson's firing for excessive force against a 17-year-old Hispanic boy. The record had been sealed as part of a settlement agreement that allowed Wilson to seek employment elsewhere without the termination on his public record, a common practice that enabled problem officers to move between departments without accountability. This revelation transformed the case from a disputed interpretation of events to a pattern of documented misconduct that the Westbrook Police Department had either failed to discover during hiring or deliberately overlooked. Armed with this information, Anthony confronted Captain Phillips in a calculated move to create division within department ranks. "Captain the First, have evidence that Wilson was terminated for almost identical misconduct in Lakeside. Did your department knowingly hire an officer fired for brutalizing a minor, or did you fail to conduct proper background checks?" The question was designed to force Phillips to choose between admitting incompetence or complicity, neither. Option: protecting Wilson. The strategy worked. Within days, an anonymous police source contacted Vanessa with an offer to provide internal communications revealing departmental cover-ups. The source, later identified as Officer Chen, disclosed that Wilson had been specifically selected for Pinecrest patrols because of his decisiveness with problem individuals, a euphemism for his aggressive approach to minority subjects. What do you think motivates someone like Officer Chen to break the code of silence? Is it conscience, self-preservation, or something else entirely? Comment number 1. If you believe there are more good officers who stay silent out of the OCAM, fear than corrupt officers actively participating in misconduct. Hit the like button if you think police departments should be required to disclose officer disciplinary histories during hiring processes, preventing problem officers from simply moving to new jurisdictions. Subscribe to follow how this case continues to unravel the complex web of systemic discrimination. The Taylor's strategic counterattack has shifted momentum in their favor, but powerful institutions rarely surrender without deploying every available resource. Will Officer Wilson become the scapegoat to protect higher officials? Can Anthony balance his professional duties with his fight for justice without compromising either? And what toll will this battle continue to take on young Jamal as he transforms from victim to advocate? Stay with us as we explore these questions in the next part of our story. The pressure campaign targeting District Attorney Eleanor Vance intensified as the investigation progressed. Initially committed to a thorough review of the evidence, Vance found herself increasingly isolated within political circles that had once supported her career. 3 city council members called with concerns about community relations with police. The mayor reminded her about upcoming budget negotiations for her office. A state senator inquired whether dragging a dedicated officer through the mud serves justice. By the time Vance announced charges against Officer Wilson, the influence campaign had achieved partial success. Instead of felony child endangerment and assault, Wilson faced only misdemeanor assault charges. The reduced charges sparked immediate public reaction. Darius Johnson organized protests outside the courthouse, drawing hundreds of supporters carrying signs with Jamal's school photo and slogans demanding accountability. A misdemeanor for assaulting a child. Would these charges be the same if Officer Wilson had pepper-sprayed the mayor's son, Johnson, asked reporters with Anthony and Vanessa Taylor standing solemnly beside him. Counter-protesters quickly assembled across the street, some concerned citizens supporting police, others off-duty officers and their families, and a contingent of right-wing activists bussed in from neighboring counties. Their signs bore messages like "Back the Blue" and "Taylor FBI Tyrant." The physical proximity of opposing demonstrators created volatile confrontations requiring police intervention, the irony of which escaped no one. Media coverage split along predictable lines, with conservative outlets focusing on anti-police protests, while progressive sources emphasized the inadequacy of the charges. Few reports addressed the underlying issue, a system designed to minimize accountability for police misconduct, regardless of severity or evidence. For the Taylor family, the public battle came with intensifying personal costs. Jamal, gradually recovering his confidence, suffered a significant setback when he encountered Officer Wilson at a local restaurant. Seeing the man who had assaulted him casually eating dinner while awaiting trial triggered a panic attack that required medical intervention. The incident highlighted the ongoing trauma beneath Jamal's outward healing. "He couldn't breathe," Anthony explained to Vanessa after rushing their son home, just like when he was pepper-sprayed. He kept saying, "I can't breathe," over and over. The phrase carried terrible resonance beyond their personal tragedy, echoing the final words of too many Black Americans who died in police custody. Anthony's professional standing faced mounting challenges as well. Director Harrington informed him that the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility had opened an ethics investigation into his handling of the case. "There are concerns about conflict of interest and use of position for personal matters," Harrington explained with evident discomfort. "I've delayed it as long as possible, Anthony, but the pressure from above is substantial." Though unstated, both men understood that above meant political appointees responding to law enforcement lobbying. The investigation would examine every action Anthony had taken, seeking any procedural violation that could discredit both him personally and his findings about the Westbrook Police Department. Meanwhile, Vanessa's professional challenges mounted in parallel. Her law firm's partners called an emergency meeting to discuss client concerns about her high-profile case against the police department. Two major corporate clients had subtly suggested they might seek different representation if the firm remained associated with anti-police activism. Though the partners assured Vanessa of their personal support, the financial implications created unmistakable tension. "We're not asking you to drop the case," the managing partner clarified. "But perhaps another firm with less corporate exposure might better serve as lead counsel." Officer Wilson guided by his attorney, and the union responded with an aggressive counter-strategy. He filed a formal complaint alleging harassment by Anthony Taylor, claiming the FBI official was using federal resources to pursue a personal vendetta. The complaint included carefully selected excerpts from Anthony's communications with local officials, obtained through police department connections, and presented without context to suggest intimidation tactics. Additionally, Wilson gave an exclusive interview to Thomas Reeves' podcast, portraying himself as a dedicated officer being sacrificed to political correctness and federal overreach. "I was just doing my job, protecting a neighborhood that had reported suspicious activity," he stated carefully following his attorney's coaching. "Now my career and reputation are being destroyed because I didn't recognize that the subject was connected to someone powerful." The interview went viral in law enforcement circles, reinforcing the narrative that Wilson was being unfairly targeted while creating pressure on fellow officers to demonstrate solidarity. The police department's media strategy shifted to match this narrative. Sandra Miller orchestrated the release of edited body camera footage showing only Jamal's struggle after being pepper-sprayed without the crucial preceding moments that would provide context. The selective disclosure, presented as transparency, created a misleading impression of a combative subject rather than a frightened child reacting to unprovoked assault. Legal experts on television panels debated the footage without acknowledging its incomplete nature, further muddying public understanding. The coordinated pressure campaign might have succeeded in previous cases, wearing down the complainants until they accepted a minimal settlement or quietly abandoned their efforts. What the system hadn't accounted for was the Taylors' unique combination of personal motivation, professional expertise, and access to resources typically unavailable to victims of police misconduct. The turning point came through an unexpected channel. Officer Rebecca Chen, increasingly troubled by the department's handling of the case, made contact with Anthony through a secure intermediary. Initially fearful of retaliation, Chen eventually agreed to provide crucial evidence, departmental memos showing that racial profiling was not just tolerated, but explicitly encouraged in high-value neighborhoods, requiring proactive protection. More damning still, she revealed that officers were selected for Pinecrest patrols based partly on their willingness to conduct stops with minimal established cause. Wilson had been specifically chosen for these assignments based on his decisiveness with problem individuals, a euphemism for his aggressive approach to minority subjects. Chen also confirmed Anthony's suspicion about a neighborhood preservation initiative, directed by Captain Phillips in coordination with certain homeowners associations. The program never used explicitly racial language in written communications, but employed coded terms like maintaining community standards and addressing quality-of-life concerns. In practice, officers understood these directives as instructions to discourage minority presence in affluent areas through heightened scrutiny and frequent stops. Chen's evidence transformed the case from an isolated incident of individual misconduct to documented systematic discrimination operating through official channels. It created legal exposure not just for Wilson, but for department leadership and potentially city officials who had approved or enabled discriminatory practices. The revelation also shifted media coverage, as even moderate outlets couldn't ignore evidence of institutional racism implemented as policy. For Jamal, watching his parents fight not just for him but for systematic change became a powerful counterforce to his trauma. Though still struggling with anxiety and occasional nightmares, he channeled his experience into increasingly effective advocacy. His student group expanded to include youth from across the city, creating a platform where young people shared their experiences with police and developed strategies for asserting their rights while staying safe. When a local news program interviewed him, Jamal spoke with remarkable poise. "What happened to me was wrong, but it happens to kids without FBI parents every day. The difference is nobody ever hears their stories. That needs to change." As the court date approached, with Officer Chen's evidence strengthening both the criminal case against Wilson and the Taylor's civil lawsuit, the opposing forces made increasingly desperate attempts to contain the damage. Captain Phillips approached Anthony through an intermediary offering to support enhanced charges against Wilson in exchange for limiting the investigation to the individual officer's actions rather than departmental policies. The district attorney, recognizing the shifting political winds, began reconsidering the possibility of felony charges. The police union distanced itself slightly from Wilson, while doubling down on defending the department's overall reputation. The institutional machinery that had initially united to protect itself now began the calculated process of determining which sacrifices would best preserve the system while appearing to address the specific incident. For the Taylor family, these developments represented progress, but not victory. They had learned through professional experience that systems don't change through individual prosecutions alone, no matter how successful. The structural issues that had allowed a 12-year-old black child to be assaulted for walking home from a library remained largely intact, protected by laws, policies, and cultural attitudes that transcended any single case. Yet each crack in the wall of impunity represented hope, not just for their family, but for countless others who lacked their unusual advantages in confronting injustice. 5 days before Officer Wilson's court appearance, FBI Director James Harrington called Anthony into a secure conference room that was regularly swept for surveillance. No assistants were present, no meeting was logged, and Harrington's unusually grim expression suggested the conversation would not be recorded in any official capacity. "Anthony, this comes directly from the Attorney General," he began without preamble. Your involvement in the Wilson case ends today, or you'll be reassigned from civil rights to the Buffalo field office effective immediately. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Anthony maintained his composure, though internally he felt a familiar tightening. The sensation that had accompanied every major racial confrontation in his professional life, from being the only black agent in his first field office to challenging systematic discrimination in federal law enforcement policies. May I ask what justification would be cited for the transfer? His voice remained steady professional. Harrington at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Officially, needs of the Bureau. Unofficially, you've stepped on powerful toes. The police union's national president called the AG directly. There's concern that your actions are creating a precedent for federal officials using their positions in personal matters. Anthony considered his options carefully. And if I were investigating identical misconduct against someone else's child, would that also constitute using my position? Harrington's silence provided the answer. The issue wasn't Anthony's actions, but the disruption to the established order they represented. The meeting ended without resolution, Anthony neither accepting the ultimatum nor directly refusing it. As he walked back to his office, he weighed 23 years of career building against his son's justice and the principle at stake. The decision crystallized when he returned home that evening to find Jamal helping younger students understand their rights during police encounters. Watching his son transform victimization into advocacy, Anthony recognized that no professional achievement could justify abandoning this fight. The following morning brought another crisis. Officer Rebecca Chen, scheduled to provide sworn testimony about departmental discrimination, failed to appear for her deposition. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected. The police department reported she had accepted a temporary special assignment requiring immediate relocation. Anthony immediately recognized the tactic. He had seen similar, convenient reassignments of potential whistleblowers throughout his career. Using FBI resources, despite the risks to his position, he initiated a discreet location effort, concerned that Chen's safety might be at risk given the significance of her testimony. The search led to a startling discovery. Captain Phillips had personally arranged Chen's reassignment to a remote training facility nearly 200 miles away, effectively isolating her from legal proceedings without creating an overt obstruction of justice. Meanwhile, Vanessa's class action lawsuit gained momentum as Chen's preliminary evidence encouraged more victims to come forward. 27 minority residents now provided accounts of discriminatory treatment in affluent neighborhoods, many involving the same officers and similar pretexts for stops and searches. The pattern was becoming undeniable, shifting from anecdotal complaints to documented systematic practice. Investigating financial connections behind the discrimination, Vanessa uncovered troubling relationships between the police union, local politicians, who controlled department funding, and real estate developers, with investments in maintaining neighborhood character in areas like Pinecrest. Campaign contributions flowed from developers to officials who appointed police leadership, while the homeowners associations that had encouraged aggressive preventative policing included several prominent local business figures. These connections suggested the discriminatory practices extended beyond police department culture to encompass economic and political interests invested in maintaining de facto segregation in desirable neighborhoods. Jamal, finding purpose through advocacy, worked with his student group to create a powerful video about his experience. Unlike the police department's edited footage, Jamal's narrative included the psychological impact of the assault, the family's struggle for accountability, and the broader context of similar incidents across the country. When the video went viral, it provided a compelling counter-narrative to official accounts, particularly resonating with young viewers who recognized the universal fear of being powerless against authority figures. The night before the rescheduled hearing, a secure courier delivered a classified file to Anthony's home. The sender remained anonymous, but the FBI watermarks and clearance levels suggested someone with significant access. The file contained evidence that the problems extended beyond the local police department to include corruption within the district attorney's office and potentially federal officials who had systematically buried civil rights complaints from the region. If authentic, the documents indicated that Wilson's assault on Jamal had occurred within a much larger context of institutional misconduct protected by officials at multiple levels of government. The family faced an agonizing decision. Using the information might secure justice in their specific case, but would likely violate federal security protocols and potentially compromise sensitive investigations. Anthony's career would certainly end, and he might face prosecution for mishandling classified information. More concerning were potential national security implications if certain operations were exposed. As they debated the ethical dimensions late into the night, Anthony's secure phone rang. Rebecca Chen had managed to contact him through a trusted intermediary. Not only was she willing to testify despite the department's attempts to silence her, but she had secured crucial evidence before her sudden reassignment: complete body camera footage showing Wilson explicitly profiling Jamal based on Jamal every estate, race, and referencing departmental directives about maintaining neighborhood standards. Chen's voice trembled with both fear and determination. "They'll destroy my career for this, but I can't be part of a system that assaults children and calls it public safety." Her courage provided a path forward that didn't require compromising national security while still exposing the systematic nature of the discrimination. The hearing would now include testimony not just about Wilson's individual actions, but the institutional culture that had encouraged and protected them. As Anthony prepared his testimony, balancing professional obligations against parental advocacy, he received one final pressure attempt: a call from the Deputy Attorney General suggesting that overreach in local matters could trigger a comprehensive review of the Civil Rights Division's operations. The threat was substantial. Such reviews had previously been used to defund or restrict federal civil rights enforcement when it became too effective. Anthony's response was measured but firm. "Sir, with respect, if the Department of Justice cannot support a senior official seeking justice when his own child is assaulted by police, what possible credibility do we have in addressing civil rights violations against citizens without such connections?" The silence that followed suggested the question had found its mark. The hearing would proceed with all evidence except the classified file which Anthony secured in an FBI facility. The family had made the difficult decision to address the specific case with available public evidence while continuing to work through official channels on the broader systematic issues. This principled but pragmatic approach reflected their understanding that change comes incrementally, with each case building foundation for broader reform rather than achieving complete transformation in a single action. As they prepared for court, the institutional forces arrayed against them began fracturing under pressure. Wilson, increasingly aware he might become the sacrifice to protect higher officials, approached his attorney about potential cooperation in exchange for leniency. The police union, recognizing the mounting evidence, began subtle messaging to distance the broader department from individual misconduct. Captain Phillips initiated private discussions with city officials about departmental reorganization that would present the appearance of reform while preserving essential power structures. The system was doing what it had always done when seriously threatened, adapting just enough to survive while conceding the minimum necessary to relieve pressure. For the Taylors, these maneuvers were familiar from their professional experience. The challenge would be achieving meaningful accountability rather than symbolic gestures. As Anthony reviewed his testimony one final time, Jamal asked a question that cut to the heart of their struggle. "Dad, even if we win this case, will it really change anything for other kids like me?" Anthony considered the complex truth before answering. "Systems change slowly, son, but cracks in the wall matter. Each one lets in light that makes the next crack possible." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "Then we keep making cracks until the wall comes down." The simple wisdom reflected how much he had grown through trauma and advocacy, developing perspective beyond his 12 years. The family slept little that final night before court, each processing their own anxieties and hopes. The hearing would represent not just a legal proceeding, but a test of whether institutions designed to protect power could be made to deliver justice when confronted with undeniable evidence and unwavering determination. The outcome would affect not only their family, but countless others facing similar injustices without the resources and connections that had allowed them to fight this far. As dawn broke, they prepared to face a system that had never been designed to provide justice to families like theirs, but which they were determined to bend toward that purpose through strategic pressure and principled persistence. The courthouse steps teemed with media crews and divided crowds as the Taylor family arrived for the hearing. Officer Wilson entered through a side entrance surrounded by uniformed colleagues in a display of solidarity that felt more performative than genuine, given the recent fractures in department unity. Judge Martha Rodriguez, known for her no-nonsense approach and meticulously fair proceedings, had been assigned the case after two other judges recused themselves, citing potential conflicts of interest, a transparent attempt to avoid political blowback from either side. The hearing began with Officer Rebecca Chen's testimony, her voice steady, despite visible nervousness, as she detailed the neighborhood preservation initiative directed by Captain Phillips. Officers were explicitly instructed to conduct more frequent stops of non-resident individuals in affluent areas, she explained. While the directives never specifically mentioned race, the pattern of enforcement and informal guidance made clear that Black and Hispanic individuals were the primary targets. Chen's most damning evidence came when she played the complete body camera footage from Wilson's encounter with Jamal. Unlike the edited version released by the department, the full recording captured Wilson's initial radio communication. "Got a young black male in Pinecrest, definitely not from around here, carrying a backpack. Conducting investigative stop per captain's directive on neighborhood standards enforcement." The footage continued, uninterrupted through the escalation, clearly showing Jamal's compliance and Wilson's aggressive approach, culminating in the pepper spray assault. Audible gasps filled the courtroom when the video showed Wilson continuing to spray even after Jamal was clearly incapacitated. Officer Wilson, visibly shaken by the evidence, conferred urgently with his attorney. The police union representative, who had maintained a supportive presence throughout previous proceedings, was noticeably absent, having been called to another commitment that morning, the first sign of institutional abandonment. After a brief recess, Wilson's attorney approached the prosecution with an unexpected proposal. His client would accept a plea deal, including testimony against Captain Phillips and other officials involved in the discriminatory proposal. Policias. Recognizing Wilson's fear of becoming the sole scapegoat, the prosecutor leveraged the moment to secure evidence about the department's systematic practices, rather than focusing solely on the individual incident. Judge Rodriguez, initially skeptical of the Taylors' broader claims about institutional discrimination, became increasingly troubled as evidence mounted throughout the day. When Anthony Taylor took the stand, he maintained remarkable professional composure despite his dual role as witness and father. Drawing on his Civil Rights Division expertise, he systematically connected Jamal's assault to documented patterns of similar incidents, presenting statistical evidence of racial disparities in police interventions across neighborhoods, with nearly identical crime rates but different demographic compositions. This was never about a single officer's decision, Anthony testified. It represents the predictable outcome of policies designed to use aggressive policing to maintain racial homogeneity in certain neighborhoods under the guise of community standards. The most powerful testimony came from Jamal himself. Speaking with composure that belied his age, he recounted not just the physical pain of the assault, but its psychological impact. "I used to believe that following rules would keep me safe," he explained, his voice momentarily faltering. "Now I understand that for kids who look like me, sometimes nothing keeps you safe. Not good grades, not respectful behavior, not even having a father who works for the FBI." The courtroom fell silent as the implications of his statement resonated even with those who had entered with firm opinions about the case. After 3 days of testimony and evidence, Judge Rodriguez delivered a comprehensive ruling that acknowledged both the specific incident and its systemic context. Officer Wilson received a suspended sentence contingent on his continued cooperation with investigations into departmental practices. More significantly, The court mandated comprehensive reforms, including external oversight of the police department's practices in minority communities. Mandatory data collection on stops and searches, broken down by race and neighborhood, and significant damages to be paid to Jamal and other victims of discriminatory enforcement. Captain Phillips and several senior officers were placed on administrative leave pending criminal investigation for civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. The ruling represented a substantial crack in the wall of impunity, though the Taylors recognized from experience that implementation would require ongoing vigilance and pressure. The FBI ethics investigation against Anthony was quietly dropped following the court's findings, though his relationships with certain colleagues remained strained. During a private meeting after the ruling, Director Harrington acknowledged Anthony had made the right choice while warning about continued political fallout. The Attorney General sends congratulations along with concerns, he said with a wry smile that acknowledged the contradiction. Your promotion review will proceed as scheduled, though I'd suggest having contingency plans. The mixed message reflected the complex reality of institutions simultaneously adapting to and resisting meaningful change. In the aftermath, Jamal's student advocacy group expanded into a regional youth movement for police accountability. School administrators who had initially discouraged controversial discussions now highlighted the students' civic engagement as exemplary. Working with education specialists and civil rights attorneys, the group developed resources helping young people understand their rights during police encounters while maintaining safety to knowledge that proved tragically necessary as 2-3 similar incidents continued despite incremental reforms. The Taylor family, recognizing their unique advantages in achieving accountability, established a foundation supporting victims of police misconduct without high-profile connections. The organization provided legal resources, media advocacy, and emotional support to families navigating systems designed to exhaust and discourage complainants. Officer Chen, initially ostracized by former colleagues, found purpose serving on a newly established police oversight committee comprised of officers committed to reform working alongside community representatives. Her perspective from within law enforcement proved valuable in developing policies that served public safety while respecting civil rights. The community began difficult conversations about reconciliation and genuine reform, though these discussions revealed deep divisions about the role of policing and the meaning of public safety across racial and economic lines. Some residents welcomed the opportunity for reflection and change, while others resented outside interference in local governance, a division reflecting broader national tensions. 1 year after the incident, Jamal walked confidently through Pinecrest neighborhood, no longer taking shortcuts, but purposefully claiming his right to public space. A new officer on community patrol nodded respectfully as they passed, a small gesture representing incremental progress amid the ongoing struggle for justice. That evening, as the family shared dinner, Anthony reflected on their journey. Systems change slowly, and progress isn't linear, he observed. But what you did, Jamal, transforming your trauma into advocacy, that's how lasting change begins. Jamal considered this thoughtfully. I still get scared sometimes, he admitted. But I'm not letting fear stop me anymore. That's what they want. Vanessa smiled at her son's wisdom. The work continues. Each case, each policy change, each conversation moves us forward even when it doesn't feel like it. Their victory remained imperfect and incomplete, as all victories against entrenched systems must be. The officers directly responsible had faced consequences. Policies had changed on paper, and public awareness had increased. Yet the underlying structures of power and privilege that enabled discriminatory policing persisted, requiring continued vigilance and advocacy. The Taylor family understood this reality better than most, having seen both the possibility of justice and its limitations through professional and now deeply personal experience. They had achieved more than most families in similar situations, using their unique access and resources to create accountability often denied to victims without such advantages. Their greatest contribution, however, was leveraging that privilege to create pathways for others, establishing precedents and mechanisms that future families could use in their own pursuit of justice. As their story reached people across the country, it prompted essential questions about equality under law and the distance between American ideals and reality. Each viewer who engaged with these questions became part of the ongoing work of building a society where no child would face violence based on their appearance and where accountability would not depend on having a parent with federal credentials. The arc of their story, from trauma to advocacy to incremental change, reflected the larger journey toward justice, incomplete, challenging, but ultimately necessary and hopeful. What would you do if you witnessed police misconduct in your community? Would you have the courage to speak up like Officer Chen, even knowing the personal and professional risks? Comment below with your thoughts on how ordinary citizens can help create more accountable policing. If you believe every child deserves equal protection regardless of race or family connections, please like this video and share it with others who care about justice. Subscribe to join our community committed to exposing injustice and celebrating those working for positive change. Thank you for bearing witness to Jamal's story and the Taylor family's fight for accountability, because in the struggle for justice, being seen and heard is where change begins. This powerful story illustrates how racial discrimination persists within systems designed to protect some while controlling others. The Taylor family's journey reveals several crucial truths. First, accountability often depends on privilege and connections. Jamal received justice primarily because his father possessed institutional power that most victims lack. Second, individual incidents of racism typically reflect broader systemic patterns rather than isolated bad apples. The discrimination Jamal faced was part of an unofficial policy targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods. Third, meaningful change requires attacking problems at multiple levels simultaneously: legal action, community organizing, media advocacy, and institutional pressure. Fourth, even privileged Black Americans remain vulnerable to racial profiling, demonstrating how deeply ingrained these biases are. Fifth, transformation often begins when victims reclaim their narrative and convert trauma into advocacy. Jamal's growth from frightened victim to empowered youth leader exemplifies how personal healing and social change can reinforce each other. Finally, justice work is incremental and ongoing. The Taylor family achieved significant victories, but recognized that dismantling entrenched systems requires persistent effort across generations. Their story reminds us that while complete transformation may not happen immediately, each crack in the wall of injustice matters, letting in light that makes the next crack possible. Has racial profiling touched your life or someone you know? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters and adds to this important conversation. If you believe that no child should face violence or discrimination based on their skin color, please hit that like button to help this message reach more people. Do you think police departments should require psychological screening and implicit bias training? What reforms would you implement to prevent cases like Jamal's? Subscribe to join our community fighting for accountability and justice in all its forms. By sharing this video, you help create awareness that can lead to real change in how our communities approach policing and racial equality. Thank you for witnessing Jamal's journey from victim to advocate. Remember, in the words of Anthony Taylor, systems change slowly and progress isn't linear, but each case, each policy change, each conversation moves us forward. Together we can create a world where justice doesn't depend on who your parents are,